Welcome, everyone. I'm so thrilled and delighted to be here with you today. Welcome to the teach-in on trans recognition, respect, and rights in higher education. We are so grateful to the School of Arts and Humanities, Gallerstein Gender Center for co-sponsoring this event today. First, just a few announcements. I wanted to let you know that the Teach-In series has a really full and exciting slate of programming scheduled for next semester, spring 2022. And so if you want to get all the Teach-In updates, please join the email list. I believe a link has already been posted in the chat. So you can sign up and get all of our email updates, as well as follow-up emails with action items and contacts for folks who are speaking at the events. I also wanted to add that if you value the programming that the Teach-In series provides, please consider making a contribution if you can to keep this series going. Your funding goes toward the honoraria for the speakers, as well as organizing resources for the Teach-In Planning Collective. And just a note that this is a collective organized by staff, faculty, and students. We're always looking for energy and new proposals and new folks joining us. So you can always reach out. You can either message me or send us an email at ahteachin@utdallas.edu if you want to get involved in the work we do. This teach-in on trans recognition, respect, and rights in higher education coincides with Trans Awareness Month. Since the Teach-In series began in 2020, the Teach-In organizers, as I mentioned, a collective of staff, students, and faculty, have sought to expose the living legacies of historical inequities and how they manifest in our everyday lives at UTD. Our goal is to forge new communities and expand institutional belonging through shared inquiry. We are honored to continue this work during a month that celebrates the inherent value, beauty, and humanity of trans students, staff, and faculty on campus. Before we get started, I just want to offer a few community guidelines. We welcome of engagement. We do ask that you please keep your camera off and your mic muted while speakers are presenting. And I also want to share a few community guidelines brought to us by Jacqueline Prince at the Gallerstein Gender Center. Just some ways to engage with each other as we pursue the shared inquiry. So please engage in ways that are most accessible and comfortable for you, right? And that means the chat box, verbally expressions. Please know that we welcome your authentic self and whichever ways you show up. And this is especially true during the Q&A. But while the speakers are presenting, we do ask mics off and cameras off so that they can have the spotlight. I encourage you to practice mindfulness and presence, particularly in this online space, so that we can be as fully present in the moment as possible. Please be mindful that this is a recorded space. So to maintain as much safety as possible, please know that you can communicate solely through the chat and it will not show up in the transcript. Share from your own experience during the Q&A without generalizing. We also encourage folks to think about taking space and making space in order to allow for multiple perspectives to be shared. And when we do talk at the end of the session, in the concluding section during the Q&A, I encourage you in this session and in your everyday life to think about contributions that build and don't destroy, right? So we want to challenge the idea, not the person. Keep in mind that we are all still learning. That's the purpose of the teach-ins, and trust that people are doing their best. So let's all keep an open mind no matter where we are on our educational journey. So thank you all so much for joining us. Here's the agenda for today. I'm going to introduce our two speakers. And then we will transition to the reading portion of the event with the students sharing their creative writing. And so I'll introduce the students when we transition to the reading portion. And then we'll close with a Q&A very graciously and generously moderated by one of our guest scholars. So first we have Matt Windsor-Johns, who will be discussing recent updates in the UTD system so students can change their gender marker and name. Matt received his Master's of Education from the University of Oklahoma. Currently, he is the Assistant Director of LGBTQ+ programs at the Gallerstein Gender Center. So we're so grateful for the support and the knowledge that the Gallerstein Gender Center folks are bringing us today. After Matt's talk, we will transition to Lex Pulice-Farrow, who will offer their own research and scholarship on trans experiences in higher ed. Lex is a transmasculine doctoral student at the University of Tennessee Knoxville, working under Dr. Kirsten A. Gonzalez. Lex earned their master's at Towson University, where their work focused on microaggressions and microaffirmations that trans folks receive in their romantic relationships. They have extensive research experience working with trans communities and are an expert in qualitative research. Presently, Lex's work focuses on experiences of gender dysphoria, as well as experiences of trans joy, including romantic relationships, feelings of well-being, and connection to community. We are so grateful to have you both here today. So we'll start with Matt and then move to Lex. Thanks all so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry I sound so congested today. It's that time of year. My name is Matt Windsor-Johns, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And like Dr. Gray Fisher said, I am the Assistant Director for LGBTQ+ programs in our Gender Center. And I'm so grateful that this is happening today. I used to be an academic advisor in arts and humanities, so A&H always has a special place in my heart. And I'm so grateful that you are holding space today to talk about this very important topic. So I don't want to take too much time because we have Lex and other great speakers here today. You don't need to hear a lot from me. I'm just going to give you some resources. So first and foremost, our LGBT plus resource guide is meant to be a bit of a pocket guide to anybody that, if you're in that moment of, I know we have resources on campus, but I can't think of them. This is hopefully a good resource to you to not every resource we have on campus, but some good ones to get people started. So page 1 really talks, and I think it went in the chat. Okay, good. Sometimes it doesn't. But this specific guide talks about if you want to change your gender marker or your name in the system. So I do want to give you some, I guess, upcoming hopeful things that are happening in the works. We are working with the university to look at adding pronouns in the system as well as different gender markers. Currently, there's only M and F, male and female, even though those are sex assigned at birth terms, not gender. But anyway, I digress. We are hopefully going to be adding more soon, as well as the option for everyone on campus, every student, to put their pronouns in PeopleSoft. So stay tuned. But for right now, you can change your name in the system. Unfortunately, PeopleSoft, the field is listed as preferred name. Please know that we know it's your name. It's your chosen name. It's not a preferred name. Just like pronouns are not preferred, they're your pronouns. Your gender marker and your name do not require any legal paperwork at the university to change those. You simply email the registrar's office, which their information is listed here on this guide, with your request. And depending on the time of year and what they have on their plate, it usually takes between a week and 2 weeks. So that's exciting. We also listed in the resource guide different student organizations that you could be a part of. I have to brag on our students. We used to just have 1 or 2 clubs. We now have over 6 LGBT plus affirming organizations that specifically highlight queer and trans people of color. We have the only, it's called a diaternity, not like a fraternity or sorority, but a Greek org. The first and only gender inclusive org in campus is here on our campus, which is so exciting, Chi Alpha Iota. So they're actually hosting a drag show tomorrow night and next Saturday night. So stay tuned to our social media, the Gender Center, and look for ways to get some tickets and attend that. And then lastly, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen really quick because this flyer is still kind of in the works, but Transgender Day of Remembrance is actually on November 20th. but we recognize that that is a Saturday this year, and students might be leaving for fall break. So stay tuned to our social media, but this is the current plan for Transgender Day of Remembrance. We're going to be honoring this on November 18th, which is a Thursday. We'll start with a vigil at the Spirit Rocks. The Spirit Rocks are located near Student Services Building. We're actually going to be joining together and painting the rocks, which will be really exciting. We're also going to be honoring the unfortunate lives we have lost, trans lives that we have lost in 2021, and painting their names on the rocks to really show honor. Then at 6:30, we're all going to meet at the plinth, which is that weird area with the stairs that lead to nowhere and the little stage. We're going to go over to phase 5 together. And in the spirit of trying to encourage community, we're going to be having what we're calling a comment campfire chat, and at phase 5 fire pit. So there will be s'mores. It'll be a way to honor. Sometimes people don't honor trans people until they are passed. So we are trying to build some community and show that trans people deserve to be honored in life and death. So, and then we'll end that night at 8 o'clock with a candlelight vigil at the fire pit. And depending on weather, we have the clubhouse there too, just in case the weather is not favorable. So we would love for everyone to join us if you are able to. We want to make sure that you feel heard, especially with different programs that we do. The last thing that I'll add, hopefully last night you were able to attend our talk with Miss Peppermint. Miss Peppermint is a Black transgender woman that was on RuPaul's Drag Race Season 9, and she gave an incredible talk about allyship and how it's so important to show up for the trans community. So the reason why we had Miss Peppermint is students came to us and said, we want, more people like this on campus, either virtually or in person. We want to feel seen and we want to feel heard. So that happened because of wonderful students like yourself. If you have any suggestions for programs or services, anything that we can do to help you, please know Jacqueline's also on this call. We're here to help. We're here to listen. Here's my email. Please feel free to reach out. Let us know what we can do to serve you, because that's what's most important. The last thing I promise that I'm going to say, this is an exciting development. We get a lot of questions about HRT and do we offer it here on campus. Dr. Lee Aubrey in our health center, who's an incredible ally, has been trying to finalize a contract with somebody to offer HRT here on campus. So stay tuned. I know I'm doing a lot of stay tunes today, but we are doing some stuff behind the scenes to make sure that we truly honor our trans and non-binary students here on campus. So thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to hear you, Lex, and hear what you have to say today and hear the rest of our students. And I will be quiet now so we can get to that part of the program. Thank you so much, and thank you for holding space today.
All right, so I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. First of all of the things you're doing here at UT Dallas just sound amazing. And even if it's some stay tuned stuff, just the fact that the wheels are in motion and things are in the works, it sounds incredibly hopeful to me. And so it sounds like y'all are doing some great stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, going to do the super fun thing that we all have to do on virtual things, where I'm going to ask you, can you see my screen? So just give me one moment, because I am not super used to Microsoft Teams yet. All right. Can I just get a verbal, you can see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, so today I'm going to talk about how to support transgender students in higher education. So first off, right off the bat, when I say transgender, I mean anyone who doesn't identify as cisgender, right? So anyone whose gender identity does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. I know there's many other identities that fall under the transgender umbrella, but if I say trans or transgender, just for ease in this presentation, please assume that that encompasses all of those identities. So first off, I really want to talk about why it's important to start thinking about this from an early perspective, right? Whether you're students, whether you're faculty, why is this important? Well, Early intervention is really important for trans students. Many faculty and staff are less educated about the needs of trans students, just kind of off the bat, and really they'll only become aware of these needs when a crisis arises. We also know that in the current and former political climate, especially under the presidency of Donald Trump, there was a lot of discriminatory acts that were passed against trans individuals and failing to uphold legal protections for trans students. We also know that research shows that increasing faculty, students, staff's institutional awareness leads to a warmer campus climate and better academic and psychological outcomes for trans students. So just kind of a brief, why should we learn about this? Why should we know this? I also want to touch on some basic terminology just so that we're all on the same footing. And so some of these you might have heard before, but I definitely want to make sure that, again, we're all just kind of hearing them together. So first, when I say sex, I'm going to be referring to biological attributes. And these can include internal and external genitalia, chromosomes, hormonal profiles, things like that. Conversely, gender is a person's internal, deeply held sense of gender. Unlike gender expression, which is visible to others and how we physically present ourselves, gender identity is not visible to others. Gender and sex may be aligned, so your gender could be the same as your sex, or they could be different. A transgender individual is one of those folks whose gender does not align with their assigned sex, whereas a cisgender individual is an individual whose gender does align with their assigned sex. And finally, just to wrap it all up, put a bow on it, sexual orientation is a person's sexual identity based on the gender or genders of the people they're attracted to. And people can have different romantic orientations and sexual orientations. And it's important to know that sexual orientation is different from gender identity, right? We know that those are two pretty different constructs. So this was from a study that was done by Abby Goldberg and colleagues in 2018. So it is a few years old, but this is kind of important for understanding what the present climate on campus for transgender students is like. Overall, trans students are going to experience more harassment and discrimination and feel less accepted within the campus community as compared to their cisgender counterparts. Trans students might view campus climates as more hostile and feeling less of a sense of belonging than cisgender students. Experiencing these environmental microaggressions might increase a student's risk of negative academic and mental health outcomes. However, on the flip side, trans-inclusive policies and supports, like what we're putting in here at UT Dallas, might improve students' psychosocial and academic outcomes. And finally, we know that trans students might give up on efforts to remind or correct faculty or peers on their correct name or pronouns. We also need to think about this in terms of barrier to success for trans students. We know that we are trying to make sure that trans students succeed just as much as their cisgender counterparts, but there are certain barriers that are structurally there for trans students. We know that trans folks are more likely to have a lower socioeconomic status and have more financial concerns. We know that sometimes faculty might refuse to use their correct name or pronouns. We know that their incorrect name or gender on student IDs or official documents could become barriers to accessing things. These students could experience physical harassment, discrimination from faculty, or a decreased access to restroom and locker room facilities. And now I know this all sounds bad, right? Like I'm here, I was introduced as talking about trans joy, and here I am talking about all of these barriers to success. But it is important that we as faculty members, students, allies, trans folks understand what these barriers are. We also know that faculty and students and peers might make some mistakes, and that's not always okay, but we know that there are some mistakes that could be made. Some of these mistakes might be forgetting or not being open to corrections for a student's name or pronouns. Sometimes faculty, staff, or peers could treat trans students differently than cis students. We know sometimes that educators might accidentally foster spaces in which trans students have to act as educators for faculty, or maybe they assume that all trans students need the exact same thing regardless. And so how do we push back on that? How do we make sure that we're not just seeing trans folks as a monolith, right? We're not just seeing this one community group as having one set of needs, one set of ideas, and, being seen as the same. Well, we know that faculty can play a really, really powerful role in either reinforcing or resisting transphobic treatment that students face on campus and in society. Having a good relationship with a faculty mentor or faculty advisor may act as a buffer to transphobic treatment on campus, especially when those faculty mentors and advisors have a commitment to doing better. Next is allowing space for gender diversity within your courses and daily language, making the effort to resist binary language, maybe not grouping students by gender, and using examples in coursework that show gender inclusivity. And then finally, using a student's correct name and pronouns really establishes a feeling of mutual respect and creates a good and positive rapport between students and faculty. Even just using a student's correct name or pronouns can radically decrease an individual's risk of suicidal ideation or suicide attempt. Now, I know I sped through that pretty quickly, and I do want to figure out how to not share my screen. That's the key here. There we go. Am I no longer sharing my screen? I am no longer sharing my screen. Excellent. All right. And so one of the things that I really want us to keep in mind is that trans students are students. They might have a unique set of needs than cisgender students, but there are some really easy systemic ways that we can, in fact, support this population and make sure that these students have every access to succeed, as well as their cisgender, or on par to their cisgender counterparts. That is my presentation for right now. So I would love to answer any questions, or we can transition directly into what I think is going to be the best part of the afternoon, which is the student readings. So your call.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lex. And I'm seeing lots of claps. We can, I think maybe if folks want, they can put their questions in the chat right now, and then we can turn to them after we hear the students read. Do you think that sounds like a good plan? Okay, great. I'm very excited and really thrilled that we have next 3 students who will share their creative writing based on their own experiences. And I'll read the students in the order in which they're going to, I'll introduce the students in the order in which the students are reading. So first we have Cal Thompson. Cal is a junior at UTD majoring in performing and visual arts. Cal is involved with Chi Alpha Iota Dieternity, which there's a link up in we can repost the link if you want to check out their event tomorrow. And as we've already said, Chi Alpha Iota is an LGBTQ plus affirming and gender neutral social Greek organization on campus. So thank you so much, Cal. After Cal, we'll hear from Sam Poliarco. Sam is a junior at UTD majoring in literature. He is a Gemini ambassador and the marketing chair for Queer and Trans People of Color, QTPOC, another awesome organization on campus. And after undergrad, Sam hopes to earn his master's and PhD to pursue a career as an educator. And then finally, but certainly not least, right, we'll have Veeran Shankar. Veeran is a junior accounting major at UTD and a queer trans man. He is the treasurer of Chi Alpha Iota, and Veeran loves to write and play Dungeons and Dragons. So thank you so much. We'll start with Cal. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A session for everyone to join in the audience. So take it away, Cal.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. I'm Cal, and then I should just jump in and read. Yes, okay. Okay, this poem is called Closure. It's hard to find closure in the absence of something. We look for the pink and blue threads holding us together, or the yellow threads, or green or purple. Tug them to see if they unravel, if they're embedded beneath the skin or a part of it, something deeper, if they're holding us together or holding us back. I found the threads, the ones that were wound by others and those woven in by my own hand in every color, and pulled and pulled and pulled them apart until the knots were free, and the more I prodded, the weaker they became. And now they've fallen out and apart, and I'm left with broken old strands that once bit into my skin and into my mind. Now I take them apart, entwine them in earrings, weave them into shirts and bracelets. And sometimes they still gnaw, worm, and wriggle beneath my skin unwelcome. Ghosts of that trapped feeling, feet tied down and voiceless tongue tangled tightly. They're just that, ghosts. And I've learned to step through the ties and tangles, mine are made of air and convention, nothing more, into a space that is my own, a body that is becoming my own. It's hard not to feel out of place, when the pink and blue threads are different colors or wound wrong or don't belong at all. It's hard to find closure in the absence of something, so I look for freedom instead. Thank you. That is the yes. Okay.
That was absolutely beautiful, Cal. Thank you. And I'm thinking that perhaps it would be a good practice to collectively take a breath after each reader so that we can reflect and prepare for the next reader. So I will just take one breath in. Sam, we're so looking forward to hearing you read next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. My poem is called I Worked at a Theme Park. I worked at a theme park over the summer, and on my first day, a coworker asked me about the pin on my shirt. He said, "Why does it say they, them, theirs when you're just one person? They is for a group of people." No offense. I didn't throw a fit when he just never got the hang of it. Every day it was, "She can help you take the next guest. I'll have her check you out. She can take her break first." I even said, "Just say he, him instead," and every day this man insisted on the wrong thing, and it broke me every single goddamn time. The last time I ever spoke to this coworker of mine, he asked me, "Do you believe in science?" When I got home, I screamed and I cried. His harassment ate me up from the inside because I realized that for months I mistook maliciousness for ignorance. Thank you.
That was so powerful, Sam. Thank you. Veeran, we're looking forward to hearing your reading.
Hello. I just realized mine does not have a title, but I think I'm going to call it February because that's when I wrote this, and it's around when I realized that I was a trans man. All right. I have a strange relationship with impermanence, where I violently wish to change, grow, renaissance myself, while the rest of the world stays the same. And I think it's because I worry that everything will move on without me while I still claw at the walls of the chrysalis. But when my body is top scarred and tattooed, comfortable and lived in, when my head turns to a different name, when the arc of my lips is their natural state, when I can hold my unburdened shoulders high and back, and when they do sag out of habit, someone is there to gently guide my spine into formation. When I unfurl my wings in the mirror and don't recognize their brilliant designs, blueprints, etched with unfinished palm lines and wrinkles I haven't lived yet, that will be my greatest transformation.
Cal, Sam, and Veeran, I want to thank you so much for your grace, your generosity, your brilliance, and your courage for sharing these absolutely stunning and moving poems with us. And so now I will turn to Lex and we can have a conversation, answer any questions. You're free to post them in the chat. But yes, also please, we can take a moment as well to just soak up all the love I'm seeing for all of our brilliant students.
Wow. You know, I had read each of those poems before this event, but hearing them spoken, really, it just hits me that poetry should be done out loud. So thank you, all y'all, for making sure that got done in such an amazing way. So to start off, you know, when reflecting, I was thinking about Sam's poem and how the poem really speaks to the erasure of identity that many trans folks might experience on an institutional or interpersonal or societal level. You know, and I'm wondering, for each of our three readers, what ways have you experienced this erasure?
I can speak first since this was my poem. It's it kind of happens like on a everyday kind of basis, which is really sad to hear. But like even the smallest things. This was the same job. A customer, or well, a guest, saw my pin that I talk about in the poem, and she said to her husband, "Did you see what that girl said?" And I get that, like, people are trying, and then there are other people who don't, but it's just kind of those small moments where where I feel that kind of erasure.
Yeah, so going along with Sam said, I feel similarly with erasure from, cis folk who don't understand, but there's also an element of erasure from other trans people or people who understand your identity, but just have like a very oh my God, words, have like a very strict view of how trans people should look. So even though to some extent they are quote unquote accepting of your identity, it's like a very narrow view of what trans people should be like. So for example, like if you are, a trans man or transmasculine person and you present masculinely, they might say something about how you were like falling into the societal role of a man, and like that's how you know that gender is fake, because it's based on a societal role. Versus if you present more femininely, then they're going to tell you that you're not putting enough effort into passing. So even once you break out of the binary of gender, you still face experiences of the societal binary of gender and falling into those gender roles.
You kind of end up caught between this, or not everyone, of course, obviously, but a lot of people, including myself, end up caught between this dilemma of, do I want to present authentically as myself and wear things that I like and act in ways that I like acting, or do I want to not be misgendered? And you have to wake up every day and kind of make that decision. And that can be really heavy sometimes, or just to realize in the moment that being yourself is just making your life more difficult, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like for each of you, it's this navigation between accepting, you know, a fate of being erased versus standing up, utilizing your authenticity, and maybe pushing back against a society that wasn't built for you. Yeah, definitely hear that. You know, in Veeran's poem, the feelings of authenticity that might come up with certain aspects of a gender transition, maybe that's social or physical, are described. And I guess I'm wondering, how have y'all felt this authenticity?
I'll go since it was my poem. I wrote this poem when I was like I said at the beginning, I just love talking about myself apparently. When I began sort of my social transition. So at that time, I wanted to present very masculinely in order to, pass and be societally accepted. But I think the biggest sign of me embracing my authenticity is allowing myself to be more feminine. And like Cal has said, worrying less about passing, even though transition and socially passing is important to me to an extent. It's become less important compared to being authentic to my expression and identifying that my expression is different than my identity, and that is something that is important to me. And there's a lot of facets of being queer, and just being a person, and so you don't have to fall into those strict guidelines. And when you come out as trans, a lot of your expression and identity and attraction even is sort of flipped on its head. So navigating that and having the, just feeling like you're able to explore that versus needing to be a very strict idea of what society wants you to be, I think has been my authenticity.
I can also attest to that. And also someone else was saying in the chat about like how they express themselves as well, and like how society expects us to express ourselves. I also identify as gender fluid, like the person in chat. So when I first kind of started coming to terms with like how I felt, like who I felt that I was, I was, I guess the best way for me to put it is I was worried about being a real trans person, quote unquote, especially considering because of like the fact that I'm gender fluid and because like those things are just like it's complicated for me. I don't want to medically transition, and that kind of that confuses a lot of people, and it kind of felt really pressuring. But the more I really sat and thought about it, and the more I like kind of came to terms with like really who I was, I realized that like that's okay that I don't want to do that, you know. I feel that authenticity just by like being okay with myself. Like I see myself in the mirror and I'm like, this is who I am today, and I like that.
Cal, I want to make sure I give you a chance to respond if you'd like to.
I'm so sorry. Could you remind me what the question was again? Or I can pull it up. I have it in my...
No problem. I got you. It's talking about feelings of authenticity that might come up with certain aspects of a social or physical gender transition.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's... Socially, there's a lot of pressure. There has been, for me, a lot of pressure to do masculine things. Like, I started working in technical theater because strong. And just that, breaking away from that is good, but also letting yourself be happy when things give you gender euphoria is also valid. And as far as medical transition, there is so much pressure to want to do that, and it's also so difficult to pursue that route, especially if you are a young person who is on your parents' health insurance or doesn't have health insurance. I don't have health insurance, which is fun. And just, yeah, acknowledging that you have the body you have right now, and you might not always like it, but it doesn't make you less valid, and it's not your fault that beating yourself up about not liking your body does not help you. Basically, I think I addressed the question, hopefully, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, no problem. Answer however you see fit. And it really does sound like for each of the speakers, there were really experiences of pushing back against societal expectations and embracing what you yourself enjoy and like and feel good with. And also allowing some of those societal expectations to give you gender euphoria. Both of those are totally true and totally valid. And so I also wanted to touch on Cal's poem because the poem really touched on feelings of closure and how to navigate maybe distinctions between your experienced gender and your sex assigned at birth. And so for each of our speakers, have you felt these feelings of closure? What do they feel like?
Um, hmm. Yeah, I did think about these questions before this, and then, yeah. A lot of the feelings of closure just come from self-acceptance. We had a previous event for like National Coming Out Day, and somebody brought up the idea of coming in, which was really interesting to think about, like being self-acceptance coming first and foremost, and making it a lot easier to present authentically to the rest of the world. Because then if you have accepted yourself, that makes those negative interactions a lot easier to brush aside. Like, I honestly forget I have pronouns a lot of the time, and then when I get misgendered, it doesn't affect me as much anymore, which is really nice and freeing. Because and self-acceptance is really hard, and you can't just boom, boom, I'm happy now. But you can work on it and acknowledge when you're not doing it as much as you should.
Yeah, Cal definitely hit the nail on the head. A big sign for me that I had really accepted myself was I stopped really having a ton of imposter syndrome, and when people misgender me, it doesn't super bother me at all, just because I'm so comfortable in my own identity that I know that it's a failing on their part for either not knowing about my identity or choosing not to accept it. It's not my fault that I'm being misgendered. And I especially realized my identity over quarantine. So it was kind of a strange process, quarantine, with like the only person you have is like your own head. So you spend a lot of time in there. And so one of the things I came to terms with was my trans identity. So even though I had no one to validate my identity, and I was still getting misgendered by my family every day, it was still like a personal feeling of, walking my dog like a man, doing my makeup like a man. Like, you just validate your own identity, and you just feel really comfortable at home in your own mind and your own body. And I think that was my closure, even though transition is like a whole thing that some people choose to go into, and that is something I'm interested in. But I still have the benefit of feeling comfortable enough in my own body where I'll be okay in this space between being able to transition and now. And that's my closure.
For me, it kind of took me a while to get to these feelings of closure. This isn't my proudest moment, but I was like grappling with like questions of like my gender and my sexuality, and I wasn't ready to come out to any of my family. So I completely blocked every single one of them on social media. And it took me a bit, but that time gave me the opportunity to really like reflect on how I felt about myself without like any of like the pressure that comes from coming from an Asian family, if I may be honest, and the cultural implications there. But I took the time, I grappled with it, and then I'm speaking to my mom now, and like she's been great. She's been understanding and open, and I feel like because of that, I know Cal and Veeran were talking about like um, the misgendering not bothering them in public, and I agree. But I also kind of like I'm more willing to speak up for myself too, so kind of a little different. Whenever I'm like misgendered in like I guess like a small classroom, I'm before I would have been like I would have just kind of kept it to myself and kind of like ate it up, I guess. But like now I'm like, oh, it's he, professor, and then we're able to move on. So just like the closure for me is like that security that I feel in myself and really allowing myself to relish in that.
Thank you all so much. Those were incredibly thoughtful responses. I do want to pull on one of the questions from the chat, which is for any of our speakers. Are there any specific works of art, so literature, film, visual art, etc., that have been powerful touch points for you as writers and or in general, or what role has art making or engaging with played for you?
Oh, that's a fun question. So like Veeran, I'm also very into Dungeons and Dragons. I'm also very into writing the stories for my characters for D&D, and I have so many original characters that they like. It gives me the opportunity to really like think about things that I like about myself and things that like I want to put into like the characterization and like my stories and everything. So being able to write and being able to like use these fictional settings has really helped me um, just be more comfortable with how I see myself too and how I like go about not just how I view myself, but also just how I view my likes and how I view the things that I want to interact with.
I have an incredibly professional answer to this question, and it is twinks. If there is a single thin, pretty, funny, sarcastic man out there in any piece of media for like the entirety of my life, I would just immediately emotionally attach myself to them. And I never realized it was gender envy until I started to explore my identity. So going back to D&D, which I could talk about forever, like I've been playing D&D for a couple years, and all of my characters forever have always just been like elven men, even before I realized my identity. So I was like, I just think they're neat. And I think D&D and role-playing games and writing in general is a strong way for you to explore your identity, because you always put a little bit of yourself into your characters, more so when you are playing them yourself, but even when you're writing, you always have favorites. So there are definitely characters that I've just like been obsessed with, and I never realized it was because I wanted to be them, or there are aspects of them that I desperately wanted in my life. So I think taking this to a completely different place, I think that's why representation is so important, because as fun as it is to see characters that are different than you, and as it like broadens your horizons and makes you more open-minded, it just feels really good to see characters that are like you or are characters that you want to be. And I think it's very powerful to see yourself on the screen or on the page.
I agree, twinks. For me, a lot of inspiration comes from, oh god, let me read the question again. Yes, I can read. A lot of inspiration can come from just queer pain throughout history, and that sounds sad. But just things like The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, which there's like queer history behind it and everything, but just like things like I can put words together in sentences. Okay, this is fine. Freddie Mercury, yeah, Queen, love Queen, and art has kind of become a fantastic release for me. I do a lot of painting and things like that, and just being able to express yourself freely. I'm explaining things very poorly and probably not addressing the question, but that's okay. Live your truth, everyone. But yeah, specific works of art. I like watching Queen music videos and crying. Yeah, gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that pieces of art and media can be incredibly powerful. I'll also out myself as a Dungeons and Dragons nerd, so it's nice to know I'm in good company here. And, I think for me, a crucial piece of media was Stone Butch Blues. That was an amazing read. I'm actually rereading it now as an adult, and it's a really, really tough read, but a really good read. So one of the questions from the chat is, do you have any advice on dealing with conflicts between any of your friends or friends of other friends on when they dismiss a trans person's identity? And I think this is a good question, but I also want to kind of flip it. And so I want to kind of attack this from like a strengths-based perspective. So for our panelists, what makes you feel supported in friendships? What makes you feel like your friends support, love, and care about you as a trans person?
I think when you have a lot of cishet friends, they are bound to mess up, especially if you are their friend's first experience with trans people. So the thing that made me feel very supported is just them putting the effort in and correcting themselves. You know, I like those were a lot of my moments when I was first, you know, figuring out my identity, is just like seeing the effort from, of course, I expect, you know, my trans friends to support me. And it was definitely very affirming, but for my cis friends to make an effort, even though that seems like the minimum, it was really nice. Like I would have friends that would always say ma'am, like in front of a sentence, and they started saying sir when I came out. And I had a Muslim friend that would call me habibti, which is like the feminine. And when I came out as non-binary, she switched to just hib, which just means love, because there's not a neutral version. And then when I finally came out as a trans man, she changed it to just habibi. So it was very affirming to see them put an effort in. Oh my God, all these notifications, y'all. Oh God. So yeah, just putting in an effort and being able to correct yourself and being able to take it with humility when you're wrong are definitely things I look for in my friends.
Oh, for sure. Kind of going off of that, it's also just it's kind of difficult for me to answer this question because a lot of my friends are also queer, not cis. But for me, it's really important that and I really value when my friends are also open. Whenever I first started kind of coming to terms with this, I was like, hey, I kind of want to try they, them pronouns. And it just like the fact that my friends were like, that's awesome. Yeah, we'll stick to that. And it's okay if it doesn't work out. I feel like that last part is also really important. And just knowing that um, your friends are also willing to understand like not just like the social conventions around what it means to be like not cis and queer, but also just like who you are as an individual, and that they value like how you are going about your own kind of like journey, I suppose.
I definitely want to acknowledge that it can be very difficult to be the only trans person in the room. Even if you love everyone else in the room, just like it's difficult to be the only neurodivergent person in the room or part of any group that no one else is a part of that impacts your life daily. And it is definitely very validating when you have cis friends who don't impose gender. I think like it's also gender terms are nice, but it can also be nice to have friends that just don't really address the gender binary as much. But that does completely depend on the trans person and their preference with that. And most of my friends are also not cis, so having access to a space with other people who genuinely understand not being cis is good and makes it easier to deal with being around a lot of cis people. There's nothing wrong with being cis. I love and accept you for who you are.
I'm chuckling at your last point there, Cal. So to kind of pull it back out, on more of like an institutional level, how can maybe universities or specifically professors and faculty best support you as a trans person? What do you want or need from those in positions of power?
For me, it's I know that a lot of a lot of faculty and staff want to be supportive, and that's amazing. But sometimes my cis professors don't really take being corrected with grace. So I feel like just like learning the proper ways to like respond to like being corrected, or to just interacting with like a trans student is really helpful. And just like I like for my professors, like just knowing if they make an effort and like publicly make an effort in front of the class, like I know that like translates to everyone else. And so it's like, oh, they really are trying, and they're recognizing who I am, and they're also working to make it so that like I'm not like othered in like my class, basically. So that's what that is for me.
Yeah, so Sam makes a really great point, and I have a little trouble answering this question because I'm really not out to faculty or in like any of my classes really, and that's more of a personal thing where I'm like, why bother when it is something that's important to me and it should be something that I'm comfortable expressing. So honestly, it's just like little things like I had a class that we had an assignment we would turn in. It was just like an introduction assignment, and one of the questions on there was like pronouns, and so that was great for me. I know a lot of people don't feel comfortable disclosing their pronouns, and it can be a double-edged sword because then you might end up having to misgender yourself. But for me, I'm like the kind of person where I probably will not introduce myself with my pronouns in a room where I don't know people unless I'm prompted, or if other people are also sharing and it feels like a comfortable space. So that's definitely one thing. But I think on a university-wide level, it's definitely just resources and representation. So just knowing that the GDC does a great job of this. And I think UTD as a whole does a great job of presenting itself as a queer positive campus, and seeing queer people take a part in leadership and university community. And my biggest safe space has been Chi Alpha Iota Dieternity, and the way I got introduced to that was to the by the drag show, which I saw advertised everywhere. And the way I got introduced to the drag show was by going to the gender center because they said some kind of queer, or it was at the beginning of my freshman year, so it was like just a tour of the GDC. And I thought that was great. I'd never heard of that school having a whole gender center. And I know there's a lot of universities that don't have resources like that, and some universities that straight up don't even allow queer organizations. I know one of the schools I was previously looking at was Baylor, and at the time, I don't know if it's changed now, but at the time, they did not have any official queer organizations because they were a private Christian school. And I think there's been a lot of pushback on that from the students within. So it was just very affirming to see UTD so prominently support queer students and queer organizations on campus. I thought that was very affirming because it felt like a safe space. So when I felt personally ready to expose myself, to come out, it felt like the right place to do it when I was ready. So cheers to the gender center, yay.
I definitely agree with Veeran that a lot of the time asking in person, like now we're going to go around in a circle and list our pronouns, can be very, all eyes are on you, and it feels weird, and it opens the floor for people to act in ways that might make things more stressful. In one of my classes freshman year, we did that, and it was only 6 people in the room, so how could it go wrong? But this one kid said, my favorite pronouns are me, myself, and mine, which I think he just genuinely didn't understand. And I mean, I laughed at it. It was funny, but it was also, that could have gone a lot worse. And things like that. Having an online form where students can fill it out, and then that section at the bottom where you can say, hey, I have undiagnosed ADHD, or hey, I use this name, is great. Also, I had something else. Oh yeah, definitely incorporating queer themes into material that is gone over in class where applicable, of course, makes things feel a lot safer. Like in one of my classes, it's a poetry class, sort of, so I like shouted at this event and I felt really anxious about it. And then right after that, we read a poem called Queeradactyl, which just made everything feel a lot better. And just little things like that, or classes where you play video games that are about coming out. Those introduce those themes to people that might be less familiar with them and make it clear that it is most likely a safe space, which is really affirming.
Yeah, it really sounds like making sure that no one is forced out before they're ready, having supports in place, being open and graceful with correction, and really flagging that the class is a safe space, either through the content covered or other means, is all really important to trans students. And those were the questions we've prepared. So I know we have a little more time, I believe. So I do want to open it up to folks in the chat, just to ask any questions of our panelists. Yeah, and just to see what other things are on people's minds right now. And I guess while we're waiting to our panelists, is there anything else that you'd like to say or like to underscore?
So someone in the chat asked this question. It was like, some of your favorite experiences of trans joy or affirmation. And I think one of my bigger ones was, it's just very mundane moments. I think I mentioned this before, but just feeling gender euphoria from doing little things, I'd be like walking my dog at 9 p.m. listening to music. I'd be like, dang, I feel so masculine right now for no reason. So trans joy, I think, is a really important way to I'm trying to find the right words to say, to label the identity, to identify that you're trans, because my experience was that my view of being trans was very centered around dysphoria, and just being trans meant you had to be just like upset and hate yourself 24/7. And if you didn't just straight up hate your life all the time, then you weren't really trans because you weren't suffering enough. And obviously, why would you put yourself through being trans if you weren't suffering? But now that I understand and have a wider view of gender and the identity, trans joy is a way more valid criteria of being trans. Because I'm not suffering 24/7. I'm just sort of not thinking. But the thing that makes me feel really secure in my identity is how happy I feel when I imagine myself in the future, being a man, being someone's boyfriend, being someone's dad, having the body that I want and being accepted and affirmed by people who you love me, and the things that are important to me are important to them. And I think a lot of trans people have this issue of like, they don't really have a clear view of their future, at least before they come to terms with their identity. It's very hazy. So my experience of not knowing I was trans, it was not like I knew from a young age. I just didn't know. I didn't care about my body. I was very numb to a lot of those feelings. But now I have a clearer view of the future, and I'm excited for it. And I think that's been my trans joy, is just identify. What am I talking about? I'm so sorry. Trans joy is a really important feeling, and identifying that is probably going to be your strongest indicator of finding closure in your identity.
I think that I can also speak, and I apologize for missing this person's question in the chat, but in my research, what have been my own maybe favorite experiences of trans joy or affirmation. And so I think it was mentioned that a lot of my master's research focused around the romantic relationships of trans folks. And I like to joke around a little bit and say that I love love, and that's what I like to do and I like to research. And we asked participants what their favorite affirmation from their romantic partner was. And one of our non-binary participants said that their partner told them, "I love you as both and I love you as neither." And that is like my absolute favorite piece of like affirmation that one of my participants reported. And it's actually the title of a paper that we published a few years back. And so just knowing that, you know, as Veeran was saying, like our lives aren't just suffering, right? Like our lives have joy and fulfillment and love, and just really underscoring that. And I think allowing that to be underscored in the research has felt very important to me personally.
Off of both of those points, I definitely like my favorite experience with like trans joy has to do with like a lot of it has to do with my girlfriend as well. She's a big reason, a part of like why I realized that I wasn't cis, and just the fact that she like started asking me at first, like, hey, now that you're going through this, like, do you still want me to call you my girlfriend? What do you want to do about it? And like just knowing that she was also really open, and hearing her call me like her boyfriend for the first time was like chef's kiss. It was amazing. And also, shout out to the Gender Center. One of my other favorite experiences is when I got my free binder from the Gender Center. I remember spending a lot of my life thinking, like before I even realized that it was like a gender thing, not really liking how I looked, and I didn't really know why. But then, like, you know, with my girlfriend helping me put it on, and like I looked at the mirror, I looked at myself, I put my shirt back on, and I was like, this is correct, and I love this. I didn't go anywhere that day. I just kind of sat and like looked at myself in the mirror for like a good hour or so because I was just super happy about it.
A big, on the thing of trans euphoria, a big source of that for me, because I can't do like pursue routes like top surgery right now, altering your appearance in ways that you can control is really affirming. Like if like dyeing your hair or changing your hairstyle or getting ear piercings. I'm running out of space to get ear piercings, but things like that are just, you are in control of that. And obviously not anything that you would regret. I'm not saying go get cheek gauges tomorrow. But things like that make your body feel more your own. And I kind of want to jump onto the question that we sort of addressed. Do you have any advice on dealing with conflicts between any of your friends or friends of other friends, dismissing trans identity? You don't have to put up with people like that, especially if you are a trans person. You should not have to put yourself in a space or environment where you might be in emotional or physical danger to defend yourself. And hopefully you can ask, if you need them to be in your life because you really care about them or something, you can have someone else explain to them that they need to not be transphobic. That them being a bigot is not fair to you, and you might not be able to fix it, and that sucks. But I've lost friends to things like that, and it is difficult to deal with, especially when you're really close with them, but it makes your life better to not feel guilty for being trans.
Right, that's so true, because I feel like people always ask the question is like, how do I stop conflict with this person? It's like, no, I give up on you. You know, my time and mental wellness and spoons are too precious to waste it trying to educate you if you refuse to, you know, be educated, and especially if you're going to have a bad transphobic attitude about it. I I don't need to validate my identity to you. You need to validate your reasons for staying in my life right now, or else it's not going to work out. We're just trying to live, free, happy lives, and it already comes with an extra caveat when you're trans. So it's like, of course, if it's people you're forced to be around, like your family, that's a whole different conversation. It can be very difficult. I totally get that. But it's like the people that I have to be nice to, my family, my professors, my boss, people I don't have to put up with, bullshit from, is people that I spend my free time, my recreational time with. So if you are not good for me, then why am I even keeping you around? And that might be a very callous way of looking at things, but existing is so much work. So why am I making harder for myself by leaving room for people who are not benefiting me in any way?
Yeah, for sure. I totally get that too. Which is like my whole poem was about like this coworker who I ended up having to like tell HR about. But like Veeran said, existence is it's already so taxing. So it's like sometimes you like look at these people and you just look at them and say, "Hey, that's kind of messed up," and then you just let it like not let it go, but like you don't give them the opportunity to like um make it worse for anyone. And if because that's kind of like it prompts them to like really it gives them the opportunity to think about like what they did and what they said, and if they don't want to like be mindful and do the research and follow through with being a better person, um, it's just not something you really have to keep dealing with.
Yeah, and it looks like another question of the chat is, how do other parts of your identity, for example, race, ethnicity, sexuality, disabilities, etc., impact your trans identity? How does the intersectionality affect you as a trans person?
That is such a good question. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, because I'm Indian. You guys might not know that because we didn't show our faces, but the Asian American / like child of immigrants experience is such a cultural monolith at this point. I've talked to so many people, and we all like have the exact same complaints about our culture and about our parents and about the way we were raised. So that tells me that there is like a deep cultural, generational thing going on, that I love that a lot of us are working to change that, and we're like fixing things that we feel our parents did poorly. But yeah, so if my parents are definitely very dismissive of, anything I say, honestly. They felt the same way about me being mentally ill, and then they like slowly came to terms with it. So now we're starting that process over with, being queer. So I think that definitely plays a part of it. And also, uh I feel like, back to representation, I feel like a lot of the representation I saw of trans men specifically was like thin white trans men. So I didn't really fit that paradigm. So that caused me a lot of dysphoria. I was like, I'll never look like them. It's like, yeah, you'll never look like them because it's not physically possible for you to fit that, that narrow slice of trans excellence. So I think it definitely stacking, race and ethnicity and disability and neurodivergence on top of being trans is difficult. And especially when you sort of feel like you have a lot of identities, and you sort of feel like you're doing too much. You're like, I can't be this and this. Maybe I'm just making it up because I don't know, like making my life more difficult. But people like you exist. I don't think anyone has a an identity or experience that is too much to handle, right? So there will always be someone who can relate to you and knows what you're going through. And once you find those people, the burden gets a lot lighter, and you can work on breaking down some of that trauma and those internalized issues.
I totally get that. I mentioned before that like I wasn't ready to come out to my family mostly because of like the Filipino like stigma and everything that comes with being like like a Filipino child, and it did affect like how I wanted to like how I was viewing myself when I was struggling for a bit. But like now it's um, even though I know that there's a lot of different parts to me, um, it's I'm slowly getting there, but I'm like, starting to really love all of that about myself. I love that I'm a Filipino individual, I am queer, I'm trans, um, accepting also that I was diagnosed with ADHD significantly later than I should have been, um, and all of that. I had something else to say. Um, I lost it, but I guess like the last thing I would say also is kind of working on that intersectionality too with my mom kind of is something that I'm working on right now. Not really working on, but it just kind of happens. I post about things about like trans rights or things that are going on in the queer community right now. And my mom will send me like the little like how you can react to Instagram stories with like a heart eyes emoji and stuff like that. So just seeing like my mom's acceptance of it and knowing that like she's willing to learn now um, has been a very pleasant experience for me.
Dealing with don't have the gender. Oh God, I just glitched. This is fine. Yeah, neurodivergence and everything else makes everything more difficult, and my brain is glitching a lot today. But I definitely relate to Veeran's statements on feeling like you're just too many things. And for me, I'm agender and demi-romantic and asexual, so it's kind of just like sometimes there's a lot of feelings of invalidation because like, well, I don't really have an identity, so I'm not really trans if I don't have a gender, right? Which is fun because I know that that's not true, but yeah, it's a fun thought to have. But the ADHD thing or neurodivergence, because I'm still figuring out what exactly the hell is going on with my brain. Sometimes it can be nice because I can be misgendered and really stressed out about that, or a gender interaction thing, and then my brain can just jump to the next thing. So looking for the ways in which those things are a benefit is cool to do. Heck yeah.
I suddenly remember because Cal was speaking about what I wanted to say. Like finding those things that you love about like each like individual facet of yourself. When I was like kind of thinking about, oh, what does me being gay, what does me being trans mean in like this Filipino like community, it gave me this like research opportunity to like look at old like Filipino mythology. And there is, I think it's the moon goddess in old Filipino mythology, um, that is both male and female. And so, like, I don't know, just seeing those different parts of me, like, interact in something else, like how Veeran and Cal were talking about representation, that was that was just amazing for me.
I think a lot of the representation that we see of trans voices in like popular media, or maybe who's popular on TikTok or Instagram, or back in the day on Tumblr, it really was thin, white, masculine, stereotypically pretty people. And that was kind of the assumption of the norm, especially for trans men or transmasc folks. And really unpacking that, what does it mean that, especially for me as a white, able-bodied transmasculine person, that I fit that norm? What does it mean that now I'm looked at as a professional in this field where I might be taken more seriously than my BIPOC colleagues, right? And really working to not only understand that in my own right, but make sure that I'm dismantling that in other places, and really working as an accomplice and making sure that everybody's heard, because no two people are the same, and that's awesome. We shouldn't be the same. And really working to dismantle the idea that you can only be trans through this one specific lens. Now, I know we have about 5 minutes left. So to our panelists, is there anything else you want to wrap up with? Anything else that you want to get on record before we're about done here?
I have one thing. It's from a trans influencer. You mentioned TikTok, and my brain just immediately spun all its wheels, because I remember what a force TikTok was in my identity journey because of the queer presence on that app, and also Tumblr going back. But there was a influencer. His name was I say it as if he's in the past. He still exists. His name is Mars Wright, and I remember he's an artist, and he has a statement. It was like, "Trans joy is resistance," and that really stuck with me because of my history with my narrow view of what being trans should be like. Trans joy really is resistance. Having events like this where we can speak and share our art and have resources where people can support us. It is our resistance is proving to the world that we can be happy and fulfilled while being trans.
I want to say a metaphor that resonates a lot with me that has come up before. Sometimes it's not falling into place into an identity that fits, and sometimes it is taking away the mold and just being a pile of goo on the floor. And I also want to say, gender, I barely know her. Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, thank you so incredibly much for your voices, for sharing your experiences. I truly appreciate each and every one of you who spoke, those of you who asked questions, and just to UT Dallas for hosting such an amazing event. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time, your energy, your effort, and your commitment to trans and gender diverse folks.
And I will just send all the love right back to y'all. Thank you so much to folks who participated in the chat. Thank you so much to Veeran and Cal and Sam for sharing their words and their experiences and their expertise, and to Lex especially for so beautifully moderating the conversation and sharing your scholarship. Many thanks to Jacqueline Prinz and Matt Windsor-Johns and the GGC for their resources, creating this space, making this possible for all of us. Just sending lots of love and wishing y'all a joyful weekend. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, but we're around if you want to chat and share some more love and thanks for our panelists today. Thank you.